I remember the morning like it was a photograph, frozen in time. My daughter, Layla, walked into the kitchen carrying her suitcase, a faint excitement in her eyes. I thought she was going on a short trip, maybe a work seminar or visiting a friend. But she surprised me. "Mom, I can't stay here anymore," she said softly. She looked down at her shoes, as if avoiding my eyes. I felt a strange stillness settle over me. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her hand, to tell her that no matter where she went, I would always be here. But the words caught in my throat. Where are you going?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She shrugged lightly, almost apologetically. "Somewhere that matters, somewhere I can grow." I nodded. I smiled. I told myself it was okay, that she was grown, that she had dreams, and that this was a natural step. But as she zipped her suitcase and adjusted her coat, I felt something in my chest tighten. I didn't cry, not that day, not even when the door clicked shut behind her. I simply sat in the silence that followed. The house felt different, as though a window had been left open and the wind had carried part of her out with it. In the first week, I tried to keep busy. I cooked, cleaned, read old letters, and made tea for one. Every time the phone rang, I hoped it would be her. When it was, I felt a flicker of happiness, only to be replaced by a pang when her voice was distant, hurried, or distracted. She had so much to do, so many people to impress, so many steps to climb, and I understood that. I did. But I also understood how quietly my presence was slipping away from her life. Before she left, our mornings had been filled with small routines. I would wake before her, make breakfast, and hear her footsteps on the stairs. Sometimes she would peek into the kitchen, ask if I needed help, or tell me about her dreams in the early hours. Now, those footsteps were gone. Only the quiet remained, only the echo of what had been. As days turned into weeks, I noticed the small changes first. Her calls became shorter. She started skipping our regular conversations. She spoke of meetings, of opportunities, of money and success. I listened, nodding quietly. I reminded myself that this was not a rejection of me. It was the pursuit of her life, and yet I could not shake the growing hollow in my chest. I remember one evening, sitting by the window, rain falling softly outside. I made her favorite tea, the one she liked with just a touch of sugar. I imagined her sipping it, imagining our kitchen, remembering home. And then I realized she was already living in a world where our small home, our quiet meals, were distant memories. Weeks later, she came back for a brief visit. I had baked her favorite pie, washed the sheets, and tried to make everything feel as if no time had passed. She arrived with a smile, but it was faint, hesitant. She hugged me, but the hug was short, like she didn't want to be held for too long. I noticed the way her eyes glanced at the clock on the wall, at the phone in her hand. She was here, but not really here. Over dinner, she spoke of her new apartment, her work, her friends. I listened, nodding, asking questions, smiling when I could. But a quiet ache grew in me as I realized I was now a visitor in my own daughter's life. She was polite, she was kind, but the warmth we had shared for 20 years was slipping further from reach. After she left, the silence returned. It was heavier now, filled with the absence of her presence rather than the simple quiet that had followed her initial departure. I tried to fill it with memories, with phone calls, with letters I sent that often went unanswered. I tried to hold onto hope that she would return, that our bond would remain intact. But with each passing day, I felt the distance grow. I remember standing by the kitchen window, looking at the empty street, thinking about the life we had once shared. I thought of her as a little girl, chasing the sunlight across our garden, laughing at the smallest things. And I realized that she was gone now, not in body perhaps, but in spirit. She had chosen a world that did not include the quiet, imperfect love I had to offer. The first pang of true heartbreak is not loud. It doesn't break the windows or shatter the air. It seeps in slowly, quietly, in the spaces between meals, in the sound of footsteps that no longer come, in the soft tick of a clock in an empty room. That is the kind of pain I felt. Not rage, not anger, not betrayal, just a quiet, relentless emptiness. I thought I understood ambition. I thought I would be proud no matter what path she chose, and I was in a way. But pride does not fill the void left by absence. It does not replace the warmth of shared mornings or the comfort of her presence at my side. And so I waited. I waited for a phone call that would tell me she was thinking of home. I waited for a letter, a message, a sign that she remembered the quiet life she had once cherished. But days passed into weeks, and weeks into months, and the waiting became a part of me. It was not a waiting with hope, exactly. It was a waiting with a quiet acceptance that this distance, this emptiness, might be permanent. Even in that quiet, I loved her fiercely. I thought about her every day, sometimes smiling at memories, sometimes weeping quietly when the house was dark and silent. I didn't want to push her, didn't want to beg her to stay. I only wanted her to know, somewhere deep in her heart, that I had always been here. But being here was not enough. It had never been enough for the world she wanted to inhabit. And slowly, painfully, I began to understand that the love of a mother could not compete with the lure of ambition, wealth, or the glittering promise of something greater. And so I waited. After the first few months, the distance between us became more than physical. It was a quiet, invisible wall that I could feel in every interaction, in every phone call, in every message that was more about success than about her life, about us. She had a new rhythm, now one that did not include me. Her days were long, filled with meetings, plans, people, and decisions I could not follow. And yet, I tried. I wanted to be part of her life, even from afar. I sent letters, small packages, sometimes little notes about our home, hoping she would smile, hoping she would feel the warmth I carried for her. Most of the time, I heard nothing back. When she did call, it was brief. There was always an urgency in her voice, a hurriedness, as though her life was too important, too full to linger with me. "Mom, I have to run," she said more than once, and I would nod, my voice quiet, my heart tight, saying, "I understand." I understood. I truly did. But understanding does not ease the ache of absence. It does not fill the rooms where laughter once lived. It does not replace the smell of her hair when she hugged me, or the little handprints she left on the walls when she was small. The first time I truly felt the sting of betrayal was small, almost unnoticeable to anyone else. I had baked her favorite cookies and sent them with a note. Weeks later, I called to ask if she had received them. "Yes, Mom," she said quickly, almost impatiently. "They were fine, thank you." That was it. No warmth, no laughter, no shared memory, just a curt acknowledgement. I put the phone down slowly and sat in silence. The house felt colder than usual, not because of the weather, but because of the realization that she had moved on. Not physically only, but in heart and mind. She had chosen a life that did not include me in any meaningful way. I remember the first time I saw the depth of it. A mutual friend mentioned she had attended a celebration, a gathering of colleagues, where she had spoken proudly of her accomplishments, of her plans, of her success. But when the conversation turned to family, she spoke of me as a distant memory, a chapter she had left behind. My name was mentioned once, quickly, politely, and then forgotten. I did not feel anger. Not in the way people expect. I felt a quiet sorrow, the kind that settles deep in the chest, slow, steady, unyielding. I realized then that I was no longer her priority, and perhaps I had never truly been. Not when the glitter of a new world beckoned. Over the following months, I tried to maintain our connection. I called, I sent notes, I asked about her life, but her responses became shorter, colder, less personal. Sometimes she would forget to call back. Sometimes she would cancel visits, citing urgent work or social obligations. And each time, I reminded myself that I mustn't resent her, that she was young, ambitious, and chasing a life I could not offer. But grief does not wait for permission. It comes quietly, unannounced, in the moments when no one else is watching. I felt it as I prepared her favorite meals alone, as I set a chair at the table for someone who would not come, as I listened to the empty house and the echo of her absence. I began to notice the subtle changes in her tone, the way she spoke to me. It was always polite, always careful, but the warmth I had once known was gone. She no longer asked about my day, my health, or my life. Her questions were always about herself, her work, her plans, her ambitions, and I answered quietly, gently, keeping my sorrow hidden behind calm words. The first confrontation was not loud. It was a quiet, almost invisible moment that I replayed endlessly in my mind. She called me late one evening. Her voice was distant, rushed. "Mom," she said, "I can't come home this weekend. I have meetings and I have to prepare for this project. You understand, right?" I nodded silently. "Of course, Layla, I understand. I'm sorry," she added, as though an apology could erase the growing gap between us. I told her it was all right. I wanted to say more. I wanted to tell her how much I missed her, how lonely the house felt without her, how I feared losing her entirely. But I did not. I only whispered in my heart, "I understand. I will wait." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I watched her life unfold from a distance, through social media, phone calls, and occasional messages. She had become someone I did not know, not because she had changed completely, but because the priorities she had chosen had shifted her world. I was no longer part of it, not truly. I remember the afternoon she visited after nearly 6 months of absence. I had prepared her favorite meal, set the table just as she liked it, and waited nervously by the door. When she arrived, she was dressed elegantly, carrying herself with a confidence I barely recognized. She hugged me briefly, polite and measured. The dinner was quiet. She spoke of her achievements, her travels, her new apartment. I listened, nodding, smiling, asking questions when I could. But the warmth, the laughter, the shared glances and secret smiles we had once exchanged, all of that was missing. It was a polite conversation between acquaintances, not a mother and daughter reconnecting. I tried not to show the pain in my eyes. I wanted to remember her as she was, not as the distance had turned her into. But the quiet sorrow settled into me, and I knew that things could never be as they once were. Even when she left that night, the gap remained. She waved politely from the taxi, and I waved back, smiling, while the ache in my chest grew heavier. I sat at the window long after she was gone, watching the empty street, the rain beginning to fall softly. I realized then that some things, once lost, cannot be fully regained. As the months passed, her visits became rarer. Phone calls were shorter. Messages were almost entirely about her life, her achievements, her struggles with work. There was no time for shared memories, no interest in the home she had once cherished, no connection to the quiet world we had built together. I tried to remind myself that this was her choice, that ambition, wealth, and the life she had chosen were not wrong, that my love could not tether her to me, no matter how much I wished it could. And yet the sorrow was constant. It came in the quiet moments when I set the table for one, when I heard her favorite song on the radio, when I walked through the empty rooms and imagined her presence. There were fleeting moments of hope. Sometimes she would call unexpectedly, laugh at a memory from her childhood, ask a small question about home. In those moments, I felt a flicker of the bond we had shared. But they were brief, fragile, and too easily extinguished by the demands of her chosen life. The turning point, I knew, would come eventually, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet, slow realization that our lives were no longer intertwined, that she had chosen a path that did not include me, that the warmth, the shared laughter, the simple presence of a mother's love, these were luxuries she no longer had room for in her life. And so I waited, not with hope, not with expectation, but with the quiet, resigned love that only a parent can feel, the kind of love that endures absence, neglect, and distance, and yet does not demand return. I loved her still, fiercely, desperately, but I knew deep down that the gap between us might never close, that our bond, once unshakable, had been eroded not by anger, not by betrayal, but by the quiet, inexorable pull of a life that did not need me. And in that realization, the sorrow deepened, not the sharp pain of loss, but the slow, relentless ache of knowing that someone you love has chosen a world without you. I continued my days quietly, keeping busy, finding small comforts in routine. I baked her favorite cookies occasionally, just in case she returned. I wrote letters I never sent. I whispered her name softly when the house was silent, when the night pressed in around me. The quiet grew heavier with each passing month. I felt the absence of her laughter in the morning, the lack of footsteps on the stairs, the emptiness of her room she once filled with life, and yet I did not leave her. I remained silently, faithfully, loving without expectation, waiting without hope. Because that is what a mother does. Even when the distance grows, even when the child chooses another life, even when the bond fades into polite exchanges and fleeting visits, a mother waits, a mother loves. And a mother endures the slow, quiet ache of absence without complaint. Time passed, and I began to see the person my daughter had become. It wasn't that she had changed completely. Her laughter still held traces of the little girl I had known, but the world she now inhabited had reshaped her. That world was loud, full of ambition, wealth, and people who admired her for what she achieved, rather than who she was. And in that world, there was very little room for me. She no longer called as often. The occasional message, the rare phone call, seemed more like a courtesy than an effort to stay connected. When she did speak, it was always about her life, her deals, her apartment, her trips, her plans. She spoke quickly, as if every second was too valuable to waste on sentiment. And though I understood her choices, each call left me heavier, as though part of my heart was being slowly emptied with every word. One afternoon, I received a package in the mail. It was from her. I opened it with quiet anticipation. Inside were gifts, expensive clothing, luxury items, things that sparkled and shone. She had written a short note. "Hope you like these. Thinking of you." I held the note in my hands and felt a hollow ache. These were material gestures, not signs of love. I set the gifts aside and sat quietly, remembering the small things we once shared: handmade crafts, simple baked goods, little notes tucked into lunch boxes. Those were her gestures, her love, her attention. And now, these objects felt cold, a substitute for a connection she no longer seemed to want. The first time I truly felt betrayed, I think, was when I discovered she had stopped including me in her life entirely. A friend mentioned an event she had attended. She had invited everyone she knew, colleagues, mentors, even distant acquaintances, but not me. Not once had she thought to tell me she would be there or ask if I wanted to come. It wasn't a dramatic betrayal. There was no anger, no shouting. It was simply the quiet exclusion of someone who had once been central in her world. I didn't call her out. I didn't ask why. I simply felt the weight of it in my chest, a silent knot of sadness. She had chosen a life where I had no place. She had chosen people who applauded her accomplishments, who praised her ambition, who surrounded her with glitter and gold. And I was left in the shadows, the quiet corner of her memory. I tried to reach her, of course. I sent messages asking about her life, her work, her health. Some were answered politely, briefly, without warmth. Some were ignored entirely. I learned to accept the pauses, the delays, the coldness. I learned to wait in silence, to love quietly from a distance. But the ache never left. Over time, I noticed a pattern. She would reach out when she needed advice, when she needed support, when she needed someone to listen to her challenges. But she never reached out simply to share her life, to include me, to ask about my days, my thoughts, my feelings. I became a resource, a lifeline, not a daughter to her mother, not a family to be cherished. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, a call that ended too quickly, a message that seemed hurried, a visit that lasted only a few hours before she returned to her world, and then it became unmistakable. The cold, polite distance was now her standard. She had fully immersed herself in a life where I no longer belonged. I tried not to resent her. I reminded myself that ambition is not a crime, that seeking a better life is natural, and that I could not demand she stay close. I told myself that my love alone was enough, even if unreturned, but nights were the hardest. I would sit alone, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator or the ticking of a clock. I would think about her, the small hands, the laughter, the curiosity, and mourn what had been lost. One evening, months later, she called. I could hear the stress in her voice, the fatigue, the faint tremor of worry. She had encountered a problem at work, a deal gone wrong, a misunderstanding with a colleague. "Mom, I don't know what to do," she said, voice tight with desperation. I listened quietly. I did not offer judgment, only calm words, gentle guidance. I reminded her that mistakes happen, that setbacks are part of life, that no one achieves everything without challenges. She thanked me and hung up quickly, already turning her attention back to her world of emails, meetings, and obligations. I sat in the quiet of my home, listening to the phone click, feeling the familiar hollow ache. She had reached out, yes, but only for need, never for connection, never for love, and that, I realized, was the deepest part of the heartbreak, the realization that she would not come back simply to be with me. She would only come back when it benefited her, when she needed something I could provide. The visits became even rarer. I stopped asking. I stopped hoping. I continued my routines, baking, cooking, cleaning, sitting in the quiet rooms, talking softly to myself or to the house as if it could respond. I tried to hold on to the memories, the way she used to laugh at my clumsy cooking, the way she pressed her cheek against mine when she was tired, the way she whispered secrets at night. Those memories became my refuge, my solace, my connection to a daughter I could no longer reach in the present. One day, I heard from a mutual acquaintance about her latest achievement. She had been promoted, recognized publicly, her name praised in circles I would never enter. Part of me wanted to celebrate, to feel proud of her. And I did, for a fleeting moment, but another part of me felt the quiet stab of absence. She had shared this success with everyone except me. Even when she had achieved something remarkable, I was invisible, forgotten, excluded. The months and years blurred together. Her life became faster, more complicated, more distant. She called rarely, visited even less, and when she did, the warmth I remembered was fleeting, a memory of a time long gone. I learned to accept the silence, to live with the quiet pain that never fully disappeared. I told myself that love is not always returned in equal measure, that family is not always present when we need them most, and that sometimes the people we cherish most will choose a path that leaves us behind. There were moments of small connection, a call on a holiday, a brief visit, a polite thank you for a gift I had sent, but they were fleeting, hollow gestures. They could not replace the presence, the laughter, the intimacy that had once defined our relationship. And I began to understand something I had never fully realized before, that love, even when unconditional, cannot always compete with ambition, with wealth, with the demands of a world that does not require you to stay. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one rainy evening, staring out at the empty street. The wind pressed against the windows, carrying the faint smell of wet earth. I thought of her in her apartment, in her world, surrounded by people who admired her but did not love her as I did. I thought of the quiet dinners we used to share, the small victories, the shared laughter, the warmth of her presence, and I felt the full weight of absence, the slow, relentless ache of being left behind. I realized then that this was not a temporary phase, not a misunderstanding, not something that time would heal. She had chosen a life where I did not belong, and no matter how much I loved her, no matter how patient, kind, or understanding I remained, that distance could not be bridged. And so I waited, not with hope, not with expectation, but with quiet endurance. I loved her still, fiercely, silently, from afar. I mourned the loss of the bond we once shared, and I learned to live with the hollow ache, the soft, unspoken sorrow that became my constant companion. Sometimes I imagined her standing in my kitchen, laughing at something small, pressing her face against mine, whispering a secret, and then I would remember the truth. She would never truly return, not fully. Not in the way I needed her to, not in the way I had dreamed, and I accepted it quietly, painfully, as one accepts the slow passing of a season, the turning of time, the inevitability of absence. Time has a way of teaching lessons slowly, sometimes painfully, and often too late. I had watched my daughter, Layla, build a life that glittered on the surface, full of wealth, recognition, and achievements. But beneath it all, I began to see cracks, small but undeniable signs of the cost her choices had demanded. It started with a phone call late one evening. Her voice was different, lower, quieter, tinged with hesitation. "Mom," she said softly, "can I talk to you?" I listened carefully, trying not to let my hope rush forward too quickly. I had learned over the years that these calls were often fleeting. She spoke when she needed, when life demanded her attention, not when she simply wished to share it. I don't know how to explain," she continued, almost apologetically. I thought this would make me happy. I thought I would feel complete with all of this." She paused as if searching for the right words, "But it's not enough." I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that she was seeing, finally, that money and success cannot replace connection. Sadness that it had taken so long, that the realization had come only after so many years of distance. "I miss the small things," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I miss home. I miss you." I remained quiet. I wanted to say so many things. How much I had loved her, how much I had waited, how my heart had ached every day she was gone. But I also knew that words now could not undo the years of absence. I let her speak, letting the pause linger, letting the sorrow settle between us. She asked if she could visit. I hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. Part of me wanted to see her, to feel the connection again, even if fragile. Another part of me feared that the visit would not be enough, that it would only remind me of the distance that could never fully be closed. When she arrived, she seemed smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. There was a weight in her posture, a weariness I had never seen before. She hugged me, but the embrace was tentative, as though she was afraid to hold too tightly, afraid to find what she had lost so painfully obvious. We sat together quietly at first. Words were not necessary. We simply shared the silence, the familiarity of the spaces we had once known together. And then she began to speak, haltingly, apologetically. "Mom, I wasn't thinking. I thought I was doing the right thing. I wanted more. I wanted to feel important to succeed, but I forgot what truly mattered." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of years. I listened, nodding, tears threatening to fall, but I held them back. Not because I didn't feel them, but because I knew she needed to speak her truth, to confess her regret, without the pressure of my own emotions. I lost my way, she admitted, eyes glistening. I lost the part of me that loved this quiet life, this home, this you, and I don't know if I can get it back. Her words cut deeper than any anger could have. It was not rage I felt, but the slow, crushing ache of realizing that some bridges, once broken, cannot be fully mended. The truth was clear. She had learned her lesson, but it may be too late. I reached out and took her hand. My touch was gentle, soft, steady. "Layla," I said quietly, "some things cannot be undone, but what matters is that you understand, that you see, that you remember." She nodded, squeezing my hand. The room was silent except for the quiet ticking of the clock. We sat like that for what felt like hours, two lives tangled by love, regret, and the inexorable passage of time. She spoke of the people she had trusted, the choices she had made, the mistakes that had piled upon each other. "I thought wealth would make life easier," she said. "I thought it would bring me happiness, but I was alone, completely alone, even surrounded by people. I felt nothing." I wanted to tell her that it didn't have to be this way, that family is always waiting, that love endures even absence. But I also knew that some lessons must be learned through experience, and that hers had come at a cost she could not ignore. Over the next few days, she lingered in my home, not with the ease of before, not with the laughter of childhood, but with a cautious presence, as though testing whether the bond could be revived. We talked, slowly, carefully. She asked questions about my life, about our routines, about the things she had ignored in pursuit of ambition, and I answered honestly, quietly, without judgment. It was painful, yes, to see her remorse, to see the weight of years of absence on her shoulders. But it was also necessary. She needed to understand, truly, that her choices had consequences beyond herself, that the love she had left behind did not vanish simply because she had turned away. I saw glimpses of the little girl I had known, the curiosity, the kindness, the laughter that once filled the house. But they were faint, fragile, and I realized that no matter how much she understood, no matter how much she regretted, the past could not be rewritten. The years of distance, the silent ache, the quiet loneliness, they could not be erased. One evening she said something that stayed with me. "Mom, I don't expect everything to be the same. I know I can't take back the years I lost. I just want to be here now if you'll let me." I nodded, holding back tears. I wanted to embrace her fully, to let her know that she was always welcome, that my love had never wavered. But there was a quiet, unspoken truth between us. Some things, once fractured, remain fragile forever. The trust, the closeness, the seamless bond we once shared, it could never be fully restored. The rest of her visit was quiet. We shared meals, spoke softly, and sometimes sat in silence. There were moments of connection, small sparks that reminded me of the past, but they were tempered by the weight of reality. She was not the little girl I had raised. She was a woman shaped by choices, by ambition, by absence. And I was a mother who had learned to love quietly, without expectation, waiting for a return that might never fully come. When she left, the goodbye was soft, subdued. She hugged me, lingering just slightly longer than usual, as if sensing the fragility of our connection. I held her gently, feeling the warmth, the weight of years, the ache of absence, and then she was gone. The house returned to its silence. I moved through the rooms, the echo of her absence heavier than ever. I knew she had learned something, understood something, perhaps even felt the pain of what she had left behind. But I also knew that the gap could not be fully closed. The distance we had endured for so long had altered the fabric of our relationship. I realized then that life does not always offer the chance for full reconciliation. That love, even unconditional, cannot always erase the consequences of choices. That sometimes, even when regret arrives, it comes too late to restore what was lost. I thought of all the small things we had shared, the mornings, the laughter, the whispered secrets at night. I thought of the warmth of her presence, the way she had pressed her cheek against mine, the way she had once relied on me for guidance, comfort, and love. And I mourned what could never be returned. I understood with a clarity that was both painful and necessary that some lessons are learned through absence, that some bridges once broken remain fragile, and that sometimes the heart must endure the quiet ache of loss without complaint. And so I continued. I lived my days quietly, carrying the memory of her laughter, the echoes of our shared past, and the knowledge that love had endured even when it had not been returned fully. I did not expect visits. I did not expect calls. I did not expect the warmth we once shared to be fully restored. I simply existed, holding onto the quiet truth that love does not demand reciprocation, that patience is often the only response, and that some heartbreaks, however deep, must be endured with grace. And as I moved through the empty house, I whispered her name softly each time, a quiet prayer that she would find her way, even if it was without me fully in her life. The days after Layla's visit were heavy. The house felt emptier than ever. I moved through the rooms slowly, touching the objects she had once loved, the photos of her as a child, the little things I had saved over the years. They were reminders of a life that had slipped through our fingers, of laughter and warmth that no longer filled the air. I understood, finally, that this was the nature of our relationship now. Layla had seen the cost of ambition and wealth, and she had begun to feel regret, but that did not erase the years she had spent apart from me, the years she had chosen a life without my presence, and I was left to carry the quiet ache of absence, the lingering sorrow of a bond that could never fully return. Sometimes I imagined her walking through the city, surrounded by people who admired her, who praised her achievements, yet alone in the ways that mattered most. I imagined the nights when she lay awake, thinking of home, of me, of the life she had left behind, and though the thought brought a flicker of comfort, it also deepened the ache. She had learned too late that the things she had chosen could not replace the love she had walked away from. I continued my days with quiet routines, finding solace in small gestures that reminded me of her. I cooked her favorite meals, even if they went uneaten. I cleaned the rooms she once occupied, keeping them ready, though I knew she might never return. I spoke softly to the house, whispering her name, imagining that somehow she could hear me, that she could feel the love I still carried for her. The letters I wrote to her became my secret companions. I never sent them. I didn't write to remind her or to demand anything from her. I wrote to keep her close in the only way I could, to preserve the connection that had been fractured but not entirely broken. In the quiet of the evenings, I poured my thoughts onto paper. Memories, love, sorrow, forgiveness, hope, and grief. And though she never read them, they became a bridge between the present and a past I could not reclaim. I remembered the little things, the mornings when she would run down the stairs to greet me, the way she laughed at my clumsy cooking, the way she would curl up beside me in the evenings and whisper her secrets. Those memories were bittersweet now, filled with warmth and loss simultaneously. They reminded me of what had been and what could never be again, and yet I loved her still. I loved her fiercely, quietly, unconditionally. I carried her in my heart every day, even when the world she inhabited seemed to forget me, even when she chose her own path, even when she walked away from the warmth I offered. Love, I realized, does not demand reciprocity. It endures even in absence, even in neglect, even when the bond has been broken. There were moments when I felt the sting of loneliness more sharply, holidays, birthdays, simple weekends when the silence of the house pressed in around me. I would set a place at the table for her, prepare her favorite dishes, and then eat alone, imagining that she was beside me. Sometimes I wept quietly, not from anger, not from frustration, but from the slow, steady grief of knowing that someone I loved most had chosen a life that left me behind. Her visits, when they came, were brief and cautious. She tried to reconnect, to show her regret, to reach out, but the years of distance had left their mark. The warmth, the ease, the seamless bond we had once shared, those could not be restored. We spoke carefully, laughed softly at shared memories, and yet the silence always returned, heavier than before, reminding us both of what had been lost. I began to understand, with a quiet clarity that was both painful and necessary, that love alone cannot always heal what has been broken. Regret, no matter how sincere, cannot undo absence. Apologies cannot replace lost years, and even when someone recognizes the cost of their choices, some gaps remain unbridgeable. I remember one evening, sitting by the window, the rain falling softly outside. I thought of Layla, far away in her world of wealth and recognition, and I felt a deep, quiet sorrow. She had learned her lesson, yes, but the lesson had come too late, and I was left to carry the quiet grief of a mother who had loved fully, waited patiently, and endured the ache of absence without complaint. Sometimes I wondered if she truly understood. Did she realize how deeply her choices had hurt me? Did she feel the weight of the years she had been away, the quiet meals we had missed together, the empty rooms, the silent mornings? Perhaps she did. Perhaps she carried her own sorrow in the way I carried mine. But I knew that life had moved on for both of us in different ways, and that some things could never be restored. I learned to find peace in the small moments. A letter that never needed to be sent, a phone call that came unexpectedly, a quiet smile when a memory surfaced. These were the fragments of connection I could still hold, the evidence that love endures even in absence, that bonds are never entirely erased, even when they are broken. And yet, the grief remained. A quiet, persistent ache that never left. It was not sharp or sudden, but steady, unrelenting, like the ticking of a clock in an empty room. It reminded me every day of what had been lost, of what could never be regained, of the quiet, tragic truth that sometimes even the deepest love cannot prevent absence. The finality of it settled over me gradually. I realized that Layla might never return fully, never reconnect in the way I had hoped, never fill the spaces she had left behind, and I accepted it, not with bitterness, but with a calm sorrow that had become part of me. Some lessons arrive too late, some regrets linger without remedy, some bonds, however deep, remain fractured forever. I continued my life quietly, carrying her memory, her absence, her fleeting visits, her rare calls, and the love I could never stop feeling. I spoke her name softly in the evenings, whispered her presence into the empty rooms, and remembered that love does not demand return. It endures silently, persistently, faithfully. And so I waited, not for reconciliation, not for return, not for closure that might never come. I waited with quiet endurance, with steady love, with the understanding that some hearts must bear the weight of absence without relief. I learned to accept the tragedy of it, the permanent gap, the unhealed sorrow, the knowledge that life had moved her far from me, that time could never be rewound, that regret could not fully restore what had been lost. And in that acceptance, I found a soft, quiet peace, not happiness, not joy, but a gentle understanding of life's truths. Layla's life would continue, bright and shining to the outside world. Mine would continue quietly, filled with the memories of what had been, and the steady, enduring love that remained. And though we would never fully return to the closeness we had once shared, the bond of mother and daughter endured in the only way it could, silently, painfully, and eternally in the heart. Some love is tragic, and some sorrow is permanent. But even in tragedy, even in absence, love remains, and I carried that truth with me, quietly, softly, every day until the house was silent, the rooms empty, and the heart, though heavy, still remembered. And in that quiet remembrance, I found the only solace life could offer, the enduring, unchanging love of a mother for a daughter who had chosen her own world, her own life, and her own path, leaving the bond between us forever tinged with sorrow, regret, and quiet, unspoken longing.